We have had a very busy week here of performance and events, and I'm delighted to now be introducing the final in our series of talks, Do You Follow Art in Circulation, which has been going very well. Michael will tell you more about what's happened in the last 2 days, and you will be able to watch and read the transcripts as well online. It's been a real pleasure to work with Rhizome on this series, and particularly with Michael Connor, who is standing next to me, who's the editor and curator of Rhizome. I am now swiftly going to hand over to him to introduce his panel and the discussion, but thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosalie. My name is Michael Connor. I'm editor and curator of Rhizome, an arts organization based on the internet and in residence at the New Museum in New York since 2003. It has been quite a week, and I wanted to start today by saying a big thank you to the technical team, Ben and Doug and Sam and Aaron, who have, really held together a very professional program in the midst of a raw industrial space with very little existing infrastructure. So, all of this had to fly in and get set up, and then they had to deal with all of our personalities for the past several days. So thank you so much, guys. Today's panel is the third in a series of 3. How many of you came to prior talks in the series? So we have some first-timers here. We've got this whole thing going. You guys haven't been a part of it. So it's going to take you a minute to get settled into the groove, but it's going to be good. Today's panel deals with the theme of bodies as bodies and images in circulation, and the effects that internet circulation has on our body images and on our bodies as other kinds of entities. But I wanted to start by just giving a little bit of a trajectory of the week before moving into, we're going to start with, after my sort of quick recap, we're going to have a video by Hannah Black. Following that, the other panelists, Amalia Ullman, Darika Shields, and Hannah will join me on stage. Amalia will present her Excellences in Perfections performance, kind of the first ever real public outing for that particular body of work. And Darika Shields will be giving us a sort of visual sampler of the Black woman cyborg, and then we'll have a general discussion. But this has been like a really eventful week. This has been sort of like the most immersive and best research experience for me personally, and I hope for some of the people that have joined in as well. But the first panel really started with like questions of aesthetics and artistic practice, and how we think about like aesthetic judgment at a time when the work as a standalone entity, sort of dissolving into this idea of the work as a circulating object. In the first talk, there was quite a lot of emphasis on opinions being just sort of like statements of a subject position rather than any sort of assessment of a work. There was also a lot of emphasis on the idea of disavowing, of like resisting internet circulation, resisting being a part of media cultures, developing alternative infrastructures. In yesterday's panel, I was joined by Christopher Kulendran-Thomas, Munira El-Kadiri, and Constant Doulart, who presented his rave lecture. And yesterday's panel had a sort of accelerationist bent, although there was a sort of interesting kind of mixture going on of like accelerationism and sincerity throughout. Munira El-Kadiri used the phrase, give them more of what they want, to describe sort of how she and the GCC collective came together around developing, I guess, an image of the Gulf that satisfied an accelerationist urge to understand the Gulf itself as a projection of sort of certain Western or capitalist fantasies. But at the same time, she presented other work that was like very personal rewriting of media images of her experiences of the Gulf War. So there was this really interesting kind of play between like responding to this sort of demands of the flows of capital and then finding like really specific locations within that. So that brings us up. So yesterday was on sort of looking at the idea of place and location and how that's affected by internet circulation, but it ended up dealing very much with like sort of markets, which in a way that's like what locations are today, is like different markets. And today we move from that sort of like market location discussion to a very related discussion about bodies. So Amalia Ullman, to to my right is going to be presenting Excellences and Perfections, a performance which has played out for several months this year on social media, particularly Instagram and Facebook. And Rhizome and the New Museum, as part of our joint program, First Look, which is our online exhibition program, will be presenting Excellences and Perfections beginning on Monday as an archived, captured version of Amalia's Instagram profile. And I mentioned this on Wednesday for those of you that were here, but this is part of our conservation program where we are looking at ways to conserve websites at a time when the web has shifted from a sort of page kind of paradigm to a application paradigm. So when things like the Internet Archive consider Instagram.com or Facebook.com as a single page, when in fact those things are sort of like the gate to a world of dynamically delivered content, we have a new way of approaching that process and capturing things like Amalia's Instagram at the point at which we access them. So you can, from Monday, begin to use Amalia's Instagram as an archived, captured version, as it looked not too long after the end of the performance. And it will always look that way, even as Instagram evolves into something new and even more terrifying. So that's something we're very excited about starting Monday on Rhizome and the New Museum. And now I will turn it over to Amalia. Thank you.
Hello. Does it work?
We took out the dongle, so no, it does not work. Shall I, you might have to use that arrow key for the moment while I find the dongle.
Okay. It's okay. No, I can press the button. You can press. Okay.
She has long arms.
I'm kind of weird.
Oh, I was gonna, why don't you take a minute to find it, because this is gonna be an issue for everybody, possibly. How does it, seriously. I mean, I was going to talk about bodies, which I forgot to do. Shall I do that for a minute while we look for it? Yeah, because I think it's important to define some terms before we get going. Because in the description of today's panel, I used the term image bodies, and that was like a little bit of a flight of fancy, the kind I don't normally allow myself, but yeah, just, it's fine. It's all copied. The reason I used that term was because I was thinking a lot about Hiro Steirl's text about circulationism, which was published in eFlux earlier this year. Too much world, is the internet dead? And in that she talks about images circulating on a network and becoming bruised. And the way that she describes them really is very suggestive of the idea of the image not just being of the body, but the image being itself a kind of body. And so I thought that that term described a more complex interaction between image and like the physical structure of my body than than representation or something like along those lines. So the image body is kind of a way of thinking of our bodies as partly image and of the images we see online as partly body. And the other kind of key term, I guess, of today is that's going to come up is the cyborg. And I think it's going to be interesting to think about the cyborg as like a modified physical body, but the way we experience cyborgs is often as images of modified bodies. So there's kind of like an interesting question about that slippage as well. But yes, the cyborg will be discussed at more length later on. But without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Amalia, who now has a functioning clicker with dongle.
Hello. My name is Amalia Ullman and I'm an artist. In my practice, I observe social discrimination, class divide, and power structures. You treat her better because of her beauty and her money and her trust fund. That sort of behavior, preferential treatment, VIP area, bonus point, executive club. I previously focused this type of research about objects, the life of ugly objects, the stories embedded in Chinese imports, and how cities can be experienced through consumerism. The comfort of seeing the same wavy willow in some ghetto hair salon in my hometown and at the lobby of some 5-star hotel. But what about our bodies? Bodies can crumble, perish, disappoint us, promote us. Bodies can represent who we are, what our history is, where do we come from. We can't escape our bodies. Bodies are suitcases for our consciousness, but who is this suitcase by? What label? Which designer? Could be a Mulberry or a Kelly or a Vuitton or a Vans backpack or a Tesco plastic bag or a Zara tote. Bodies sometimes say too much, but bodies can also deceive, confuse us, disappoint us, misguide us. We can also manipulate our bodies and our appearances, mostly through one single strategy: money. Excellences and Perfections is a project about our flesh as object, your body as an investment. How do we market this flesh? How do we price this meat? And how long will it stay fresh for? Meet me at the butcher's. In December 2013, I was invited to participate in a talk on self-branding. The term nauseated me. Was I self-branding? My openness had become a commercial strategy. No filter. I was unintentionally performing the stereotype of the artsy brunette, the poor female artist that had moved from a provincial town to the big city, the eager learner who requires to be saved by the male director of some museum or some school of fine arts. So, if self-representation was an asset and Facebook selfies overshadowed works of art in themselves, I'd have to boycott myself to undermine the capitalist undertone of my online presence. Let the trolls in. Even when you show it all, you reveal very little. The project would consist on a 4-month-long performance, a full immersion in a screen reality. I manipulate the rhythm of my online presence narrative to prove how easy it is to manipulate an audience through images. My online representation didn't represent me anymore. For more than 4 months, I stopped myself from socializing IRL except with those who knew about the project. Since May, I'd follow a script and all my posts were 100% fabricated. Inspired by all those Korean girls whose Instagram I check every morning and whose life plots I guess out of their daily selfies, I wrote a story in pictures. The cute girl. Smoothly mixing realities. The strategy was simple. I started with an aesthetic that was slightly close to my own taste, to therefore appropriate the most popular it girl trends on Instagram. For the first episode, I'd go for cute, pink, grunge, blonde, LA, Tumblr girl, the indie girl who has only read J.D. Salinger, the American Apparel model. Pastel colors, pink nipples and rabbits, cats, pale models, kawaii violence, flowers, bondage, bruises. Only after 1 week of posting images in my new persona, the likes went up. Very soon I started receiving messages from men who wanted to shoot me, the very phallic camera lens. I even received an email from a professional photographer in the line of Urban Outfitters and American Apparel. I accepted and I modeled for an unpaid photo shoot. Because girls want to get their portrait taken for free, of course. The model fantasy is probably the most widespread contemporary dream shared by young women from all backgrounds. Being watched means coming to life and being someone. The sadder the girl, the happier the troll. My main inspiration for this self-destructive process was Amanda Bynes. Trolls gorge on her disgrace. The sadder she is, the happier is the troll. And that's what I wanted for myself. I wanted the audience to feel uncomfortable after desiring something that was inherently wrong, wishing others failure. But how would I make it credible? People tend to believe whatever they've been programmed to believe. The audience easily generated their own narrative and conclusions after a series of proposed images that matched those in their mental archive of mainstream archetypes. The idea was to play with the notion of deception online, and my strategy was to rely on narratives seen before, so people could map the content of the photographs with ease. Money, boredom, malaise, addiction, self-esteem, surgery. The provincial girl moves to the big city, wants to be a model, wants money, splits up with her high school boyfriend, wants to change her lifestyle, enjoys singledom, runs out of money because she doesn't have a job, because she's too self-absorbed in her narcissism. She starts going on seeking arrangement dates, gets a sugar daddy, gets depressed, starts going more drugs, gets a boob job because her sugar daddy makes her feel insecure about her own body, and also pays for it. She goes through a breakdown, redemption takes place, the crazy bitch apologizes, the dumb blonde turns brunette and goes back home. Probably goes to rehab, then she's grounded at her family house. I point out in this episode the popular sugar baby for feminist empowerment. I complemented the photographs with a series of statements I'd post on Facebook. These sentences were appropriated from the blogs and tumblers of real sugar babies. Being a former escort, I wanted to tackle this idea because as a feminist and as someone who believes in rights for sex workers, the notion of empowerment always seemed really, really misleading. I believe in equality and I don't stand for inverted sexism. Reshaping the body. The only thing that interrupted my period of isolation was a talk I gave with Dr. Brandt at the Swiss Institute in New York. This was unrelated to the performance and closer to my research on the topic of blandness and middle-class aesthetics. I was comparing the new trends in plastic surgery to my writings about the wavy willow. For the further understanding of these processes, I went through 2 procedures of this type myself, under the guidance of Beverly Hills plastic surgeon Nima Shemirani. He modified my nose through his own standards of beauty and injected me with hyaluronic acid fillers in my cheek, and a drop of Botox at the tip of my nose to not look like a witch when I smile. The legitimacy of these procedures was a strategy for the fictional boob job to seem more believable. If the only public appearance was that of the talk, the audience would now believe whatever I present to them. Technologies of the self. I've always been interested in the pain inflicted on women's bodies, especially how it's always taken for granted, from Brazilian wax to liposuction. That female me time filled with sequence of little tortures. How would people, especially an art audience, react to the female artist going under the knife? Better than I expected, the audience wanted more. The same as what happened with Amanda Bynes, everyone seemed to be on the encouraging side. It was funny how believable the story became, taking into account the bad quality of the images. The picture of me in the gown was taken right after a visit to my Spanish gynecologist, and the post-surgery photographs were all appropriated from different women. I supported the images with a surgery diary in the style of the plastic surgery website realself.com, in which, unsurprisingly, the painful experiences are deeply infantilized, and the description of post-surgical suffering are explained between lols and funny hashtags such as morning boob, frankenboob, boob greed. I'd excuse myself from the seem to wanting to please by using the I do it for me argument, where me is imagined as a pure and precious inner space, untouched by external values and demands. But isn't this me overdetermined by a larger patriarchal structure that makes cosmetic treatments seem the only option for psychological survival in a world hostile to women's bodies? I kept on training and going to pole dancing lessons to make everything seem more realistic, uploaded videos to make the transition more credible, or padded brass filled with socks to keep the fiction going.
I think it will play if you click.
Oh, yes.
It's so good, he just wishing he could bite it. Never turn down nice, lame assholes don't.
Normalization via coercion. When you repeat a lie, it becomes a truth, and a fake truth generated through images has more validity than a verbalized, genuine truth. Images are more powerful than words. It is hard to escape from the cosmetic gaze. The trolling became more acute, and my fictional self was growing sadder with the time. She was just trying to be prettier and perform the social role assigned to her at birth as a cis female. But all she got was hate. The meltdown took place. The crazy bitch went into this black hole of depression, and her social interactions became weirder with the time. The crazy bitch got hurt. The bitch entrusts no one no more. And she gets to her lowest point, and the audience loves it. No one says anything. Tears and disappearance. The crazy bitch, the former hot babe, goes to rehab. Leaving some breathing space in between updates suggesting that I had been sent to a reformatory with no internet access, I waited around 2 weeks to post an apology. The crazy bitch realized about her mistakes. She's sorry. This was an analysis on the archetypes of female perfect behavior: calmness, virtue, discretion. The apology got 240 likes, and I received messages from people I haven't heard of in almost 5 years. People had been following in silence. I succeeded in providing the most entertaining content, another human sorrow. The third episode meant recovery. The hashtags were health, juices, interior design, yoga, simple, family. I posed with a random baby who I said it was my cousin, posted photographs of breakfast I never eaten. The narrative hinted to various ideals of perfections and salvation. Gwyneth Paltrow's Goop, Miranda Kerr organic cosmetics, Giselle Bundchen yoga selfies. My life had been normalized. I was now a brunette whose boob job had been concealed under a flowery Sarah shirt. I went on holiday with my new boyfriend. I had been saved. Gaze as cultural construction. How is a female artist supposed to look like? How is she supposed to behave? How do we consume images and how do they consume us? Are we judgmental? Maybe, or not at all, or absolutely yes. All I know is that my words have less validity now, because even my own real body and voice can beat fabricated Photoshop images. We live in the electronic economy of looking good. We all know the prices of your artworks will exponentially grow in relation to your looks and the likes on your Facebook. But the good news are, if humans' perception are so malleable and the tools and distribution of media and images have not been decentralized, it's in everyone's hand to destroy archetypes. It's in our hands to bring the queer into mainstream narratives. If we can make our own porn, we can make our own romantic comedies too. Thank you.
Well, we have a lot to talk about already, and we're only just getting underway. But before I hand it over to Derica, I wanted to say that I think one of the things that's going on here, and we'll discuss it more at length, is a sort of like there's a critique or an amplification or a working with the idea that we have these technologies for like body manipulation, and in some ways they just become like ways of like replicating certain like social ideals or archetypes. And so the technologies which are meant to be sort of liberatory are often employed in ways that are not. And there are many reasons why that's the case, but it's just an interesting kind of like note. One of the artists that I was really hoping to bring over for this panel is a young artist from New York named Andrea Crespo, who has also kind of done some interesting work on images of bodies that circulate in fan art and how those are radically manipulated in ways that are like really different from the kinds of social ideals that are at play, or archetypes, let's say, at play in Amalia's project. And what's interesting there is that she kind of points out that those like serious modifications are not necessarily liberatory, but they're certainly they have a much different valence than this. But I wanted Derica to come along today and make a presentation. I invited her to sort of like look at the idea of the cyborg as like, or the body that has been modified through technology as like not a privilege and not necessarily like a destabilization of the social order, but possibly like something that marks a body in a different way. So before I give away her presentation, I'm going to hand it over.
Can I have, which one of these is the...
I think this one is the one that was.
Okay, great.
Should we change this one?
Hi everyone, my name's Darika Shields, and today I'm going to talk about cyborgs, specifically black women as cyborgs in 1990s music videos. So I was interested in the ways that, well, basically Michael and I had this chat, and I told him that I was interested in the ways that people most vulnerable to premature death and destitution had imagined themselves as more than human, post-human, or cyborgian. And I noticed that during like right now on Tumblr, in like the kinds of networks I'm in, a lot of these images are being circulated, partly because the 90s are just in fashion, but I think also because these images seem to posit or pose some possibility, some imaginative possibility that I wanted to explore a little bit. I am the co-founder of a series called The Future Weird, and as part of that, we screen films by directors who are black and brown from all over the world, but focusing on experimental and sci-fi and futuristic films. So this is sort of part of that project in that I'm wanting to put together a screening that focuses on 90s visuals. So yeah, let's go. So of course there are some women working today who play with the idea and the concept of the cyborg. There's Janelle Monáe, who talks about herself as a robot, an android, a cyborg, and Erykah Badu. There's also famously, Beyonce's Put a Ring on It video where she, in the music video and subsequently as part of the promotion, she walked around with this kind of cybernetic hand. But I was really interested in how the fact that the 1990s seemed to be this moment where a swathe of Black American, especially women artists, were experimenting with this idea of becoming something other than solely human, or exploring the contradictions that already inhere in that category. So this is TLC when they made the video No Scrubs, which was directed by Hype Williams, who is a very important figure. So I guess before we talk about Donna Haraway a little bit, I want to think about like the context, this, I guess, social context of 1990s America. So at that time, Bill Clinton was in power from like 1993 to 2001. And this is a moment when, although he is portrayed himself, I guess, and was received as this sort of benevolent, liberal, nice guy who was described at one point as the first black president of the United States, I think because he played the saxophone or something. But he also presided over a massive change in the state of welfare, and these were quite oppressive changes, and they were predicated on a sort of they really relied on this idea of black women, especially poor black women, as welfare queens. So there was this construction that had come down from Ronald Reagan, and then there was this kind of bipartisan consensus during the 90s that welfare needed to be reformed radically. So in 1996, something called the Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Act was passed, which basically introduced workfare, right? So you have to work for free, basically for free, in order to receive the welfare that you're already entitled to. As part of this scheme, black women especially were pushed towards taking any job they could find, whereas white people who were accessing welfare were encouraged to pursue further education. So this was just one of the ways that black women specifically were being kind of we're being constructed as, not constructed, but we're being kind of further marginalized and also stigmatized. So the welfare queen stereotype relies on this idea that black women are recidivist, terrible mothers, deceitful, manipulative, and will like somehow trade their food stamps for like a Cadillac or something, even though it's impossible. It's like a very loaded idea. So at the same time as all of this is happening, so at the same time as the black woman's figure is being kind of used in order to precipitate a lot of oppressive social and economic changes, there's also this concurrent swathe of black women performance artists and performers constructing themselves as strange creatures, which is what I wanted to look at. So Donna Haraway is like a well-known theorist, feminist theorist, and she understands the cyborg. In the Cyborg Manifesto, she describes the cyborg as a cybernetic organism, a hybrid of machine and organism, a creature of social reality, as well as a creature of fiction. It's also worth noting that her cyborg is often a woman or an ambiguously gendered creature, and the cyborg for her is transgressive, and it breaks down a lot of the dichotomies between what is human and not human, or organic and mechanical. So let's get into it. So the first clip that I'm going to show is from Missy Elliott's, do we have to click it, maybe? The Rain. So here we can see, I guess you saw Missy in her massive black suit made of some amazing material, and as the clip goes on, you'll see how she manipulates that material to change the shape of her body, to alter how we encounter her. So I want to posit that one of the fantasies that we see manifest in this representation of black women, or this presentation of black women as cyborgs, is a kind of release into fluidity. So a breaking down of the boundaries of the body. In this, we see this like billowing black jumpsuit that obscures her body, but at the same time makes reference to the fact that she is a black woman who is too big to fit the kind of models of attractive black femininity, which are very narrow, that are available. So that those would require that she be a light-skinned woman with fat only deposited in her breasts and arse, and not really anywhere else. So she takes this kind of designation and she blows herself up, right? She transforms herself into something strange and uncertain. I think that she refashions herself in some way as a kind of strange aberration. In Super Duper Fly, which is the subtitle of the song, I think she's playing with this idea of herself as a fly, as some sort of, she's got the bug eyes and that like encrusted helmet. And so she is rejecting the boundaries of her body, but also the ideas that are layered onto her body by kind of getting rid of this skin. And then I think in this shot you can kind of see how Hype Williams, the director, his fisheye lens kind of expands the space that's available for her body even further. Because, she's already big, right? Like, I think there's already the idea that she's taking up too much space. She's also a rapper, which is like wasn't then especially like a happy place for women. So next I'm thinking about Janet Jackson, and I hope that these will, let's see. Oh, they're not playing. They're kind of, they're just GIFs, they're not videos, but anyway, I can describe them to you. In the first, up at the top, she just falls back onto her bed, and then you see her apartment is this kind of amazing chromed out thing which moves all by itself. In the second, her hand falls down onto the sheet, and her nails, which are already long, grow. of their own accord and turn into these like square-tipped, beautiful, very 90s acrylic nails. And then towards the bottom, we have her walking across, right, and her shoes transform themselves spontaneously. And I think that part of the fantasy that's in operation in this video is this sense of control, but also invulnerability. So almost all of it takes place in this apartment, apart from when she goes out, surrounded by this cadre of girls. And basically, what I see happening is that her body is being created or represented as completely invulnerable, but also profoundly self-sufficient. So where there were ideas of black women's kind of dependency or over-dependency on the state, or to an exploitative degree, she lives in this world in which she is entirely self-sufficient. There is a strain of thinking about cyborgs that suggests that I can read it to you. Kathleen Woodward specifically writes, "The possibility of an invulnerable and thus immortal body is our greatest technological illusion." But what I think is happening with the black woman cyborg is that the invulnerability of the body is not really geared towards immortality, but rather towards survival and the ability to reproduce oneself without becoming exhausted. So we see the kind of total realization of Janet Jackson's Cyborg in 2008, which is also more standard, much more sexualized, overtly sexualized. It's a sexy cyborg thing going on. This is a clip from a Lil Kim video.
Seen a lot of faces.
Okay, so that's from a video called How Many Licks? And in this, Lil Kim is she's basically represents herself as 3 different types of doll through the course of the video. She basically, it's such a complicated and complex video, and the lyrics are very amazing. It's entirely about cunnilingus. But it's a clit-centered model of heterosex, which is really interesting, very forceful. And in that we see these dolls being constructed, we understand that her vision of sex in this is entirely about her pleasure, right? So each reproduction doesn't exist in relation to sexual intercourse. It only exists in that she has these dolls constructed, which are all constructed in order to receive pleasure. So she doesn't exactly fuse the organic and the artificial. I think she's just more interested in how these are already imbricated, how they're already part of the same thing. At one point, words pop across the screen which say, "She doesn't satisfy you, you satisfy her." And for her, this is pleasure that cannot be quantified. It's infinite and abundant, but it's only for herself. So these were just some ideas about cyborgs and black women's bodies that I wanted to share, and maybe we can talk about them later. Thank you.
Excellent. Hannah, we've used up a lot of our time already. In general, collectively we did that. That was something all of us did. Not so much you, because you... No, you should read it.
Can have an audience vote.
I'm just making note of that fact.
Okay, I'll read it really fast because I'm really good at that.
I know you are quite good at it. I was actually going to say, don't read it too fast.
No, I'm going to read it really... Okay, it's
whatever
quite
you need
short,
to do.
I think. It's just, I don't know, whatever. This is a lot of material, but it's fine. It's just for thinking.
Why don't you also maybe...
You asked this thing about... sorry, do you feel like I'm far away? You asked this thing about images and bodies circulating through networks. So I've kind of written a sort of response to that, but it speaks to some of the things I think everyone else has discussed. Anyway, how did bodies begin to circulate? Europe's adventures in colonial extraction established a vast global distribution network that shipped bodies, mainly African people, all over the world. These bodies were commodities that could speak and die. The money accrued from this enterprise built London and cities like it. The paving stones we walk on are cut from, and the fabrics we wear are woven from, the material of this only partly imaginable violence. This is not necessarily a matter of complicity or of guilt, but only an observation about the texture of the world in which all images appear. How did bodies begin to circulate? The proletarianization of European serfs and peasants transformed them into the working class. These bodies were the bearers of labor power, the raw material of profit. The property and land laws instated at this time by the rich exploded existing communities and impoverished and criminalized the indigenous people of Europe. The idea of national identity was forged in order to artificially fuse together these scattered and humiliated populations. There is no true working class nationalism. The state is, and always has been, an attack on its people. Rather than being in an antagonistic relationship, national specificity and the network co-create each other. These two processes, bodies as labor power, the wage slave, and bodies as commodities, the slave, are deeply intertwined and mutually dependent. Both also entail an intensification of sexual violence and patriarchal control, as men are compensated for their own unfreedom by being gifted pretty much free access to women and children. Global communication predates global communication predates the colonial capitalist enterprise. Long before the birth of white supremacy, there are trade routes crossing Africa and Asia, hybrid identities along every coast, like in Zanzibar and places like that, and so on. But the capitalist period begins by hurtling bodies into thin air to circulate according to the movements of profit. We use words like modern and contemporary to signal changes in the arrangement or meaning of images. But I wonder if we could put more pressure on these apparent novelties if we could situate the present in this long history of circulating bodies. Hopefully we are the last or among the last generations of a collapsing empire. No one will cry serious tears for the end of European bourgeois culture. It's the shiny surface of a world of shit. But in the meantime, we create proofs that we are somehow still living, and we distribute them among each other. Like our ancestors, who were laborers and slaves and servants and wives, but still carried in themselves the secret of their selfhood, even as they were made into things. We too hold the sharp object of survival tightly in our closed fists. The artwork, the pop song, the selfie, the shirt that looks so good on you, the kiss you still remember, the forgiveness of friends, the house party, the email that came at the right moment. A network in which bodies circulate is also, despite itself, the kaleidoscopic circulation of lives.
It's an interesting point at the end, because I had been also thinking about how the word bodies has this connotation already of death, and that if we had talked about lives in circulation, I had thought of it as more optimistic, but actually that does sound quite pessimistic as well. But I wanted to, because Amalia, you set out a kind of like 4-month arc there of performance, and I think we should just start by like reestablishing a couple of the facts of that performance, because so.
Can you play the video in the background? The video documentation, very silent. Oh,
yeah, of course. Is it easier to find from your folder?
Yeah.
Maybe it's in. I think I have to get out of VLC. Hide. And then. So basically, I mean, there's a few things that I wanted to like just kind of like amplify. Oops. One is that in that project you were essentially like everything that you. I can't really see it very well with the lights, but can't trust a man with technology. Everything that you sort of posted on social media for about a 4-month period, it was like April to September, was scripted. And so like there are all these different dimensions of it, because I think in one way the project is like pointing towards like a sort of media culture of representation of like cisgendered female subjects or something, who are kind of privileged or like aspiring to privilege, let's say. And but on the other hand, it like exists within the social fabric of like your friends and like professional colleagues or something. And so there's like an enormous, so there's, on the one hand, you're like appropriating the experience of all these women who are kind of participating in, I guess, the regime of cosmetic surgery and the selfie in a way that kind of marks them as privileged, but maybe not like the most privileged people. And on the other, you're kind of like trolling all of your friends. I mean, it seems like there's a lot of, how did you kind of navigate all of this sort of like complexity, I guess? I mean, yeah.
Well, even though it was scripted from the very beginning, like the 3 episodes and how the images would look like and how the behavior would be, it kind of developed because obviously sort of things started happening that make the performance richer. Like, for example, that the professional photo shoot had never planned that, or like the way people reacted to things, or like the messages I received sometimes weren't really what I was expecting. Like
the moment when you like moved into like the apology mode, I was following Amalia on social media, and at that moment I thought that was like you were disillusioned with the performance and you were quitting. And I was like, oh, she couldn't keep it up because it's impossible. But in fact, you were like so rigorous that it was, it's quite interesting. But people have expressed a lot of anxieties to me about this project and a lot of criticisms as well because, because for like 4 months you looked like the worst person that we know or something. Like you looked like someone who was propagating this like terrible image of like a cisgender woman. And so we all know, people that are in this room have this like privileged knowledge that was a performance, and it was studied from a kind of world where that is actually, unfortunately, very common. But then like, one of the key anxieties, and a lot of men express this anxiety to me, is that then convinces other women to like have a boob job or something because.
That's not. I don't think I thought that Amalia was a terrible person. I also found it stressful. But I think my interpretation, which is obviously totally wrong, I didn't know it was a performance, was that you were distressed or you had an eating disorder or whatever. I think that's quite a weird and specific thing to be like. This is a terrible person who's what I mean. Like
you're
this.
right,
I know
yeah.
you didn't mean it necessarily like that, but I don't know. Sorry.
No. Well, I mean, let's not say a terrible person, but like a replication of like a lot of problematic issues or something.
Well, that's one of the things. That's why I wanted to talk about the performance and be able to explain myself, because it made me very anxious for a second, especially with things like the plastic surgery, which is like an anxiety that many women have. And when you see someone that you kind of respect or something doing something, like people give it a second chance or stuff. And I did receive like some messages from girls that, and I personally I have no problem with plastic surgery whatsoever. I'm really into body modification. The only problem is like when things like this become a necessity for your body to become normalized and be part of this normal, like how your female body is supposed to look like. Are your shoulders too wide, or do you have hips or not? Especially because in my case I've always paid attention to this like female body shape, because I guess you probably have like the same thing. Is that I feel that real Latino bodies are never really represented in media, like, or real Asian bodies, for example, are never really represented in the media. It's just like a white body in like different shades. Like I would say like the same body structure. And that's why I really like wanted to have the chance to like say that the performance was a performance. But I think that the plastic surgery thing was why I chose that is because the main inspiration was all these Korean Instagrams where girls like have this obsession for beauty that we don't really have here yet, and it's like this daily modification of the bodies, where like plastic surgery is like really common and like documented, and it's like a status thing, because obviously it costs money and like it becomes like a thing, like having double eyelid, the same way that the first like Iranian immigrants in Beverly Hills like just got a nose job, not because it looked good, but because it meant something. So that's kind of like what I was looking for.
There is a sort of bizarre like doubleness of like simultaneously like you should look natural. I mean, I feel like a lot of people write about this,
Of
like,
course,
oh, I love,
yeah.
you know, the way that especially a certain kind of man will say, like, I love brunettes, as if they're supposed to get some kind of, obviously, I mean, white women with brown hair, and they want a kind of award because they don't like blondes, and really, like, a certain kind of straight man seems to get a lot of personal satisfaction from not having sex with blonde women, which is kind of weird. So this idea that you should simultaneously, like, be authentic and natural, but also look really great. So it's like, I really like the example you gave of the Tumblr thing of, like, messy high buns, and it's like a black woman doing a messy high bun, which obviously you can only do if you have a certain type of, like, I guess straight hair. So I don't know.
Well, I was always very much into the idea of like a fake natural, and like that, especially because I come from Spain where like the artificial is always very stigmatized. Yeah. So people still do go to the gym a lot or like do all these things, but it has to look natural because it's like we're against Americans and like everything has to be like low key. But yeah, I mean, like one of the main points of the performance was because I've been. I had been so, I had been so objectified before without really wanting it, just like by being myself in a way and like not really wanted to objectify. That was kind of like a role-playing game of like seeing like what was accepted as a female artist to look like or not, which is something, for example, that I always really like about someone like Petra Kortright, who also like plays around with the dumb blonde aesthetics, which pisses many people off because a female artist is not supposed to act like that or like be like that.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting like that you're kind of like that even in my like preamble there, I was kind of like expressing this judgment towards people that are responding to a system in which like extremely small differences mark bodies with like very differing kind of values, I suppose. So
I think it's also interesting, like, I guess that, well, anyway, like I'm interested in what it means. There's this idea of like you're objectifying yourself, but if you just take it as a given that you're in some way already objectified by the sort of surrounding culture, then I think the question of self-objectification becomes quite different. And I think that really comes across in the sort of like cyborg African American women or whatever. That actually, if your background, if you start from like you're an object, which you know women and especially black women and women of color do, then it's like, well, what are you going to do about that? Like you could kind of like desperately try and kind of like aspire to this sort of like human authentic identity, which in some ways you're never quite going to be allowed to have, or you can just go like straight like full bore for this like I'm just going to be the best kind of, I don't know if that's how you read that.
I think in the Lil' Kim video, like, basically the commodity herself as commodity is the horizon, like, you know what I mean, that is the possibility, that's what she is and what she's aspiring to, you know, and she's just very aware of that and inhabits that. And I mean the video was not well received by so many because it's like people already felt as though she was pandering towards this like idea of herself as a commodity, right? And I think she's just like, no, this is like a loop. We don't go anywhere from here. This is it. And so, I mean, it's kind of a bleak place.
That maybe is the idea of making it so obvious that it becomes disgusting, and people really realize of what is actually going on by exacerbating that, right. Instead of being like the natural thing, or
right, yeah.
But it's interesting because when we met and talked about this, I thought you were going to show a kind of different segment of media culture in which the cyborg was like not, I mean, was assigned a kind of lower sort of social value or something, that the cyborg was like the first soldier to die or something, that they were the most, oh, you know what, I don't think that's on the screen behind us, is it? Can you open it in VLC? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that image of the cyborg has definitely been part of like the screenings that we've done. So I talked about there's a film by a British filmmaker called Kiboy Tavares called Robots of Brixton, which you can watch on YouTube. And in it, the cyborgs have basically taken the place of I guess, immigrant population. So they live in Brixton, they do all the most menial jobs, and there's a riot which is then folded back onto onto Brixton riots as they have occurred in like recent history. And that was really, I mean, that is an interesting point of like looking at the cyborg. I guess I was interested more in like what do people who experience themselves, who know that they are part of a demographic which is already disposable, is how do they imagine themselves through technology? You know, like what kinds of fantasies emerge, and how are those? How do bodies? What kinds of bodies are displaced by those fantasies? Like what kinds of bodies are rejected, and what kinds of bodies are created?
I think it's also interesting how just thinking about the sort of, I think a lot of this stuff kind of conceals, like also what you're saying about the, like making something so evident that it becomes kind of disgusting. And I think there is a lot of effort sort of ideologically or whatever, however you describe that, to sort of, so for example, how sex works very horrifying to people, but obviously there is always some kind of exchange, especially in heterosexual relationships. Like the deal is that like you put up with quite a lot of shit, I think, for most women in heterosexual relationships, in order that then you have someone, especially if you're with like a middle class white man who's probably gonna like, you know, you're probably gonna have a nice apartment. I'm like, whatever, I don't know, this is just like my personal like favorite thing, is sometimes you have a nice apartment if you have a rich white boyfriend, but that's not supposed to be how you...
That never happened to me with
I'm so
white
sorry.
boyfriends.
Oh, well.
So paid sex
maybe
work is...
maybe we can find you another one. But I just think it's interesting how you're not supposed to say that's why you're doing it. So it's also like you're supposed to just spontaneously... So like Petra Courtwright does this thing, which I also found kind of annoying, but then I sort of checked myself for it, where she's like, oh, I'm really into my wedding registry and planning my wedding. Like, of course, like, I also recognize the kind of like cultural edict of like everyone should be in a relationship. Like, it's fucking tragic if you're a woman who's not in a relationship, especially an older woman. Like, that's why kind of, even though people shit on Tracy Emin, she's quite cool that she's like, I'm single, oh my god, it's awful. I love that she does that in public, even though she's like a horrible Tory and stuff like that as well. Yeah, I just think it's this interesting thing where you're not supposed to say what the actual inner logic of things are. You're supposed to pretend you just happen to be doing exactly what you're supposed to be doing.
I mean, that's one of the things I really wanted to talk about in the performance. It's like I have this fictional boyfriend, and like that, like everything in the end, like revolves around that idea, which is like something I like try really myself not try to take into account. And it's this like, so I break with this boyfriend, and this is why this happens, and then I get in relationships with rich men, which are my sugar daddies, and something else happens, and everything is because of this, you know, male figure there. And then at the end, like I go back home and everything, and then I have like a new boyfriend, and I'm stabilized again, and like it's like this idea of being saved, which is like something I had to deal with without me wanting it, because of the, you know, female artist stereotype as well.
How do people who comment respond to your various boyfriends?
When I split with the first one, they were like, oh, he's such an idiot, like, you know, you'll be fine, everything. And then with the new one, they were confused. But it was like, the breakup was funny. The breakup was really, really funny. Because like I was sad, and then like I was like going on dates again, and like dressing up, and like doing all these things, and like yeah.
It's been a roller coaster.
Yeah.
My mic's on. Someone else is gonna have to talk as well.
Should I do an impression of you?
Well, can you do an impression of me?
I'm Michael Connor.
I don't think you can. I don't think you can speak slowly enough. What'd you say?
No, sorry, I was just starting out.
No, but I think that the way, so, what?
She's dissolved. Sorry, please continue.
It's getting more and more difficult by the minute. But I was thinking, I think that, like, thinking about the positions that are being staked out a little bit, like, well, I mean, the narrative detail of your performance is so rich, so, like, we could talk about that all day, but I think just, like, the positions are interesting because in the videos that you showed, you know, there's, like, I like the way that you describe it. It's like, what options are at your disposal in terms of you have access to technology, and so like, in what way can you like, you know, you accept the terms that your body is a commodity or object, and then what do you do with that? And then in Amalia's project, there's like a different set of options at her disposal, and then like an intent to kind of like move those to like the nth degree. So to return to your video is like, I think like kind of moving towards like a more of a disavowal of the body or something?
I think we talked before about how I was really interested in this idea of abolition of the body, and actually I've sort of had to step away from that because it just sounds like I'm really into like the singularity or whatever that thing is when everyone uploads themselves to the internet and then everyone's happy. But I think
it's like a void. You have or negation. Or
well,
something.
I think what I thought would be interesting in terms of an image body is instead of presenting a kind of like surface of a body or whatever, it's supposed to be this kind of internal. And I was actually imagining one body that transforms into lots of different kinds of people. The idea there's a sort of like mutability of the kind of concepts of the body, at least. And I think that sort of came out of like a whole set of thinking, which is maybe a bit dubious, but this idea that the body as we understand it now is kind of invented with these two kind of big historical moves that I mentioned in that short thing I read out, which is like wage labor, where the body becomes the site of like your labor power. So the thing you sell when you go to the capitalist and you're like, please give me some money so I can pay my rent and stuff, you're like, I have the capacity to work. So that's one way in which the body is like, that's one kind of way in which the body is like given substance in the world, and then the other way is the body as literally as commodity. So these are and I think and there's all sorts of, and also how like there's this long tradition that Silvia Federici writes about, a lot of people write about like literally like as men are kind of proletarianized and like taken away from like their own means of reproduction, it's like, don't worry, you can have women as this kind of like resource. So women become this like common resource held between men. I mean, this is really like broad historical gestures, but I think they at least like, firstly, I think suggest that the body is this quite complex thing that is historically formed. Like you don't necessarily, so if you met someone from like, I don't know, whatever, like whatever, I can't even think of a time in history, 400 BC, and you're like, oh, the body, we might not necessarily share, we might share the same kind of appearance or whatever, but we might not share, possibly wouldn't share the same like concept of what a body signified. And also what the other thing I think is good is, and this is maybe related more to the whole like thing of like post-internet or whatever kind of attempts to kind of grasp the contemporary, which I think are kind of worthwhile or whatever, but it's just to sort of, I think thinking about patriarchy and like white supremacy and whatever sort of complicates these kind of attempts to like periodize a little bit, because it's like you don't have this kind of like post-crisis, like precarious, like post-2008 capitalism. What you have is like a continuous assault on like basically everyone who isn't a capitalist. Like that's like literally going on from like the birth of the current social order. So rather than like, oh my god, there was like a bank crisis and then it's got really precarious and bad and like some rich people don't have as much money anymore or whatever, or some people who weren't rich but maybe had like more access to like, anyway. So I just think like it's not to like throw out the window the idea that things like the internet have a particular like social meaning and make particular effects on our behavior, but it's just to like, because I feel like the stuff Amalia's talking about, for example, like you could probably have talked about in like the 70s or whatever, it's just the methods of distribution have changed, but I don't know if it was the case, like a lot of these things I think have been fairly historically consistent. So yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, in that sense, I think this performance is very related to an essay, one of the first essays I wrote, which was about these internet social networks in Latin America, where people would really use the selfies to determine their class. So the selfies, like the background of the selfies would mean a lot. Like if you were in the slums, it would be very obvious because the quality of the camera is really bad, and like you have like some shitty like bed frame in the background, and like everything's falling apart. And then like, the rich people would just like be in this like these normal looking houses, and it's just in the background of the picture, but it means a lot. And this is one of the things that I wanted to play with the performance, is this idea of deception, of how things could be manipulated to that extent that it becomes real, and that's like it was like criticized in the media in itself, not even just like with female bodies, but like in terms of the news, of like how by repeating again and again and again who's the bad one, it like becomes an obvious answer.
I just had this it's kind of a bit tangent, just when you're talking about backgrounds of images, and I was thinking about like, there's that woman who does critique my dick pic, which we just ran an essay about in the New Inquiry, but she's always like, clean your room before you take your dick pic. But just, I don't know if anyone's written about the dick pic and the selfie as these kind of like, because that seems to be like an interestingly totally different construction. So there's the selfie, which is mainly young women and they're narcissistic and whatever, and then there's the dick pic, which is a way in which a man kind of like signals his like erotic capital that he can like, but I don't know if there's any like,
or
it's
happiness.
just interesting how different,
I think one of the things about your performance that strikes me is that it's very like sealed behind, there's all of these men and people that commented, like a lot of them wanted to kind of touch you, and like it's very much about how like what about how there's like this disparate nature between like what's happening in the social media performance.
One of the most interesting things was like, even though it's obvious that I'm like very good at constructing images, even if you don't know it's a performance, like they're pretty well done. The amount of messages of guys being like, can I shoot you? Like, it's like just like, but like taking that power out of me, like let me represent you, which I found really interesting. That was like one of the most interesting things.
There's something interesting about like the permeability suggested in your video, and then like the idea of the cyborg you mentioned as impermeable. And I was just thinking about like another image that we're seeing now of like an impermeable human technological entity, which has been circulating a lot virally in the media. But I'm going to not get too specific because I think it's time to see if any of you would like to join in.
Sorry, one of the last things that also the performer, one of the main things is like to point out how femininity is constructed and like how supposed to be of femininity is like this set of like symbols and like we're not born like that. That was one of the main things, like how it can be manipulated and constructed.
Yeah, I mean, I think like one of the anxieties I mentioned is like specifically around plastic surgery. And it's funny, like your performance really situates that in a continuum of ways in which both like the body and the sort of feminine identity are kind of as much fiction as social reality, social fiction as social reality, to use the Haraway phrase. I really would like to see if anyone from the floor would like to join in. You have only a few seconds before Hannah gets the mic back.
Hiya. I guess I just wanted to ask about kind of how far does it go, the performance? Like, I'm thinking about how I would feel, say I'm about to post something on Facebook and I'm alone in my room and I'm just feeling shit and I want to post something and I'll post it and it'll get likes, and that kind of online ego will collapse into my real life ego and I'll feel better at that moment by myself. So I was wondering, you know, obviously this is a discussion, it's a discursive, performative thing that you're doing, but do you ever find yourself kind of falling into the pool?
No, actually not. For good, actually, because I was 100% performing, so it wasn't me. Like, I didn't find myself beautiful in those images. I knew the likes weren't for me. It was just like this constructed thing. And especially because to avoid doing that, I would devote maybe 3 days of my week to do this, take all the pictures, go to a hotel, do it, forget about it, and go back to my routine. Then I'll have a folder, and I upload these things every day with like to make it even more impersonal. For the last episode, like the second episode, which was the one where I get more like bullied for in a way, or like was the more extreme one or whatever, I generated all the content for a month in only 1 week, and then the rest of the time I was actually in a meditation retreat in the forest with very limited internet access. So, well, in the internet I was this, like, you know, the crazy bitch whoring around hotels in Los Angeles and New York. I was actually cleaning cabins and cooking vegan meals. So, like, that helped me actually separate it more and see it more as a project, and it really like didn't affect me in that way like at all.
Any other questions? Well, any other questions? We probably have time for a couple more, but. I mean, I wonder, just going back, because you did speak quite. Oh, we do have one. Sorry, it's quite difficult to see.
So you're talking about like criticisms of society against body as commodity or as slave, but you're not really talking about the empowerment of occupying your body. So
it's a disembodied voice. Yeah, I think my. Can you raise your hand? Hi.
Okay, hi.
Yes, a person with.
Sorry.
So what about the empowerment of occupying your body? Can we? I think this is a kind of Hannah question. Like, can we reclaim embodied experience? And I think that relates. I think we're getting into that.
I find this a really, this is one of my like favorite whatever or stupid like observations or I don't know, but I could just feel like this strange idea that embodiment is like definitely good, and that like occupying your body, I don't really know what you mean by that, but I guess you mean some sort of like I am my body kind of thing, which I think can be really great. There is obviously really good experiences of that, like eating or sexual experiences or whatever, but there's also terrible experiences of having a body that's being tortured, that's being abused in various ways, and so I don't know, I guess to me, like, as much as like it can be good and you can work it to your advantage, there's no like, so that's also, I'm just interested in the idea that the body is quite a complicated site that also makes you vulnerable to lots of different forms of oppression. I mean, for example, you wouldn't have to go to work if you weren't occupying your body. Unfortunately, like, occupying your body is the reason you have to like be able to like pay your rent and like eat and other things that mean you have to do things you hate doing, probably, unless you're lucky.
I guess I think this question of like being in your body as like a sort of mantra that has arisen and that is circulated, like be present and be in your body, has a really interesting significance in like what the subject position is, right? Because I think like in terms of encountering, say, racism or sexism, often there's a dissociative mechanism that people who have to like negotiate these very abusive and strange terrains employ, right? Which is emphatically not about being in your body in that moment, is in fact about kind of circumventing this, like that idea. So, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I guess I agree. I don't feel so wedded to this idea of like being in your body as uncomplicatedly empowering necessarily.
Yeah, when you're talking about the idea of empowering the body as a mantra, I was thinking about the fact that permeability is another kind of mantra that that people kind of pull out as like something good. And I was thinking about that just because it's like this image of like going into the interior, and so much of what we looked at is about the exterior, except for like Janet Jackson, it's like somehow seems very much about like permeability. And so maybe it's a similar thing where like permeability isn't necessarily good because like who are you permeable to or whatever. It's not like an inherently good thing or something.
It's like, this is a bit, sorry, I keep doing slight tangents, but this just occurred to me yesterday and I'm pleased with it. Is it really, a few days ago I was complaining about the way that some men in my life, and I was saying this is a sort of gendered thing. I know it's not always, like women can do it too, but that thing of being very upset and then sort of retreating and then not wanting to talk about stuff is just something I personally find frustrating. Obviously everyone's different. I'm not saying all men and women are like that. But like, anyway, I was complaining about on Twitter as like men, blah, 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 and like my Twitter feminist Harridan persona, and like someone said, oh, but men don't talk about their feelings because they feel like it makes them vulnerable. And I was like, it does make you vulnerable to talk about your feelings. It's like actually kind of awful sometimes. Like, it's not necessarily always fun. Like, it can be compulsive or it can make you feel shit. So like, I think this thing of like that like vulnerability and like this idea of like it's good to be vulnerable, and there's this idea of we just kind of like offer men the promise of vulnerability. It's like, actually you're probably doing quite well if you're totally invulnerable and like a hard whatever, like hard bitch, hard whatever it is that you are. Just like, you know, that's there's a reason people do that, you know.
I still feel like you're avoiding the subject of occupying your bodies. Like, if you're being beaten and you're not within yourself being beaten, then you're not going to respond appropriately to being beaten, to change the fact that you're being beaten. You're going to deny it by some abstract othering.
What's an appropriate response to being beaten?
Yeah,
if you're posting images of yourself as an anorexic like girl having some kind of crisis, and maybe you're experiencing that, but you just said that you weren't, like working through it yourself. But meanwhile, you're eating vegan food in a cave.
Oh,
isn't that a more empowering thing
to
to be presenting to other people?
I'm not vegan.
Talking to all of you,
I'm not
really.
vegan. I was cooking vegan meals for others. All the material of the performance has been based on personal experiences through me and like girlfriends that I had, and like, you know, I was an escort myself. I know how it looks, you know, to be in that world. I was in Monaco. I've seen the hookers. I know how it looks like. And I didn't have to revisit that to know what it is. And then, like, for the other part, let's say the kawaii aesthetics. I was into anime when I was 16, and I have friends who have eating disorders, and I know how that works. I've been through that. You know, like, I also been through the fact that I don't really have a family, and I know how to pretend to have one very well, like posing with a baby, or like, I know how it feels to not have the background. So I did experience that before during the performance, I was actually working on other things, like other essays, like my shows and everything, but like, it is actually based on personal experience and things I actually felt. So
the question's funny to me because I thought we'd been fairly articulate on the idea that authenticity as a demand to women is kind of fucked up, and I feel like it's a bit strange to then basically make an authenticity demand. But I just would have hoped that would have come at least be something you might like reflect on. If you very strongly disagree, maybe it'd be just something to be like, wow, like a lot of people seem to think that they don't want to be told by men how to be authentic.
I think that there is like a sort of structure in the world that asks you to disassociate from your body in certain ways. Like, let's say some conditions of capitalism, you know, are about, I guess the idea being like, when you're on your iPhone in the bus, you're not experiencing being on the bus or something, and that's like a kind of...
Shit on the bus. I mean, in London, it's not very good on the bus.
Like, we don't have to be in every single moment. I do find that demand like quite tyrannical in like an oppressive way. Yeah.
But I think that the specific ways in which we are not on the bus are ways that
I love the bus,
can be,
but I'm a weirdo. So
ways that can be sort of like monitored and become part of the enormous social experiment that we're all part of on the internet. And also, like, you know, I actually, in London, I really enjoyed the bus. In New York, it's not quite as nice, but it's like public transportation is a really important way in which like different social classes come in contact with each other in the city. And I think like maybe some people like use the internet in like really expansive ways and come into contact with a wide variety of people and have like productive exchanges between like people with that are more or less peers. I don't know.
Michael, we have another question right here.
We have another question from the same person though?
Different person,
okay.
A woman this time. I guess my question is a bit general, but sort of to get away from the whole feminist discussion, female bodies, male bodies, that distinction. Can you, apart from Amalia, because I guess with your project it's quite obvious, but how does the whole kind of theme of this panel, the digital, affect or change your perception of your own body? Because I guess I didn't quite, I don't think that was discussed enough, sort of thing. So how does the fact that with this digital revolution or the acceleration, whatever we're experiencing now, whatever the terminology for it is, with this, you know, ever-present internet and digital and social media, how does this change or affect your view of the body, or as a woman, or as a, you know, gendered race?
Yeah, the specific theme is internet circulation, and I think that the point was made well by Hannah that internet circulation is sort of just the latest form of previous forms of circulation, but I would say that there is a difference in scale.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really contentious point. I know, it's just, it was a sort of like, I thought it would be an interesting thing in response to what you'd put out there with the prompt. Were you asking? I wasn't sure who you were asking in particular. Was it just generally?
Yeah, just generally, just to see how, you know, apart from just accelerating it, was there any other change that you see, or in your work, or how you perceive it?
Personally, because I'm quite like ADHD, so and I also have no sense of direction. So in lots of ways, the internet, and especially having a smartphone, I can't believe iPhones have only existed since 2007. I feel like it's been in lots of ways quite life-changing. I also use Twitter in a really embarrassing way, basically to self-soothe, because I get very anxious and I sometimes can't sleep very well. So I'll go on Twitter because, especially if, like, you know, I'm like most often like on my own, and I'll be like in those moments, and these are moments when I'm on my own, I'm very anxious, and I'll go on Twitter and I'll start to just like say like things, like, and I, you know, and people like favorite it, and it's like a little whatever kind of like dog treat reward, and maybe sometimes people even say nice things to you or whatever. I mean, it's a bit embarrassing because sometimes people say I follow you on Twitter, and I'm like, oh God, you have access to like my worst moments or whatever. I'm just compulsively putting it on there. But I feel like, and also I was reading a woman online talking about like listening to music with her phone, and like on the subway, and a guy comes over to her and tries to like hit on her, and she's like, I can't hear you, I can't hear you, I can't hear you. So I think people use, I mean, I'm not saying that's my only, I do sometimes feel a bit disoriented when I'm just like staring at my phone or the screen, and I just come back into the world. It's quite a strange feeling, but then I also use it in loads of ways that do remind me of my body. Like I like watching pornography, and that is something that's very embodied experience for me. And like there's lots of, or I love, you know, like listening to music and whatever. I don't know. So like I suppose I'm just, maybe it's a really banal point that I keep making over and over again, but like these things are complex, and I don't think technology in itself has any particular valence. Like even a gun might not have any like particular valence. It depends who's holding it or whatever. So I don't know if that really, maybe that doesn't answer the question. Do you want to have a go at the question?
Well,
I can't remember the question.
yeah, I think
But I mean, was it about the internet? And
why
just
it's just
generally?
about we haven't
It
talked
was, wasn't it?
about the internet enough. So
I mean, I guess
Because you showed
for me,
music
I guess I
videos.
talked about Tumblr a little bit and the kinds of networks that I'm part of as a result of that. There's like, you know, there are these ideas about like Black Twitter and Black Tumblr and certain spaces that exist as places where people can kind of sharpen their critical voices against one another. And so I think that that's been important for me, and also a lot of these images were pulled from Tumblr or pulled from like a Tumblr I edited, or you know what I mean. So that kind of sharing of ideas. There was a moment last year where it felt like everyone online like was drawing out of Tumblr and talking about Afrofuturism and Black futurisms and brown futurisms, and that was all going on in this kind of digital space, but also manifesting in lots of like IRL events and that kind of thing. So yeah, I don't know.
this is going to be the last question. So do you have a last thing to say, or I can close it off? I think because it's been the batteries of the microphone died, the batteries of the computer died, and my own battery is running real low. But I think just to return to that question, I think we've talked a lot about the image and the body, and I think that, you know, in terms of like that, the place of that on the network, that affords the image like this ability to have different kinds of impacts, and also kind of like allows images to sort of interact with each other in different ways, allows us to interact with those images. So there's a kind of recombinant, to use Andrea Crespo's word, aspect to the images that are in circulation now of our bodies. And so all of the sort of like things that we've been talking about today, about like how there's like the body as like a kind of object or commodity that's like marked in certain ways by, you know, that accord it social value, like those things, I think there's like a kind of changing spectrum of values because of this sort of recombinant nature of the internet. But I think what remains to be seen is like where that's gonna, you know, whether there's like a destabilization of that spectrum of social value, or whether there's just sort of some new kind of regime emerging which is as inequitable as the previous.
I have some hope because that's something that already started in the porn industry, where like now it has totally been decentralized and everyone has this access to be like their own pornographic subject, and it's like all these like different tendencies online that like are accepted, and everything starts always in porn and the sex industry. So I guess the next step would be the mainstream will be really good. So I think that's it.
You can close the panel if you like.
I mean, that's interesting. I guess there's like, that's a really nice and optimistic way of thinking about it. I guess I'm like in and witness a lot of conversations amongst like Black women bloggers. Like Danielle Henderson has written an amazing piece, I think wrote her PhD dissertation about the fact that like mummy, like the difference between Black and brown and white mummy bloggers, and who makes money and who like gets book deals off this kind of thing. So it seems like the structural inequalities are just replicating themselves, and it's a similar thing in that like Black Tumblr or Black creative Tumblr exists, it can be a place because it's open to like mine information without ever, you know, it's just this open pool. So I don't know. I feel like, yeah, I don't know. I'm not so optimistic.
You should thank them all for coming.
Yeah. Oh, shall I close it? Ooh. Thank you all for coming. This was wonderful. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you guys. That was really wonderful.
Thank you.